Hello all, welcome to lesson 3 of the Rook Endgames series. This is the Philidor position, another super important core one. Paired with the Lucena, the Scipione Lucena position, these are the most important positions for you to start mastering this endgame. Because not only both concepts will apply in future positions, but normally the Rook endgames tend to finish in one of these situations. So let's look at this one. The Philidor position shows that the defense is in a passive defense, so the rook is just juggling around on the 8th rank, and the king is already well positioned in front of the file where the pawn will promote. But on the other hand, white is already cutting the king on the 7th, so our rook is very well placed, and our king is benefiting from the shield of the pawn. So the first rule is we never should advance the pawn too much without it helping the shielding our king. Let's see, for example, if I advance, what is the best defense then for black? It goes to the other side. The farther away, the better. So you have more space, and it will start to bother the king with checks. Like for example, the king go here, and then we are just going check around, and when the king moves, we attack the pawn. And so, as you can see, white can't win anymore. So losing the shield is not an option. Other mistake over here is to go in front of the king and in front of the pawn. So opposition of the king and in front of the pawn. This is the same thing. We are going to be target of a check, and then when we come back, well, then just rook comes back again, and now we will have the options to check the king from behind, and there's no way now white can progress. We are going to see this defense in the end. But for now, let's focus on what is the correct way to win it. And the correct way is to advance the king to g6. So now it's black to move, maybe just a passive move by the rook, and now we advance the pawn. So the king can also move to g8 to make it a bit more harder. And now how can we force black to lose from here? Well, we simply give a check, and the king goes to f8, and now we move to h7, and now simply we have two options. We are threatening to check and take the rook, of course. So if the king goes over here, like for example, then check, the king moves, we take the rook, and then there's no stop to the pawn. This is a bit beginner's move. So the rook comes to the other side, and now we advance the pawn. We check. So the king needs to come back, and then we check the king. Then the king moves out, and we take the rook. So again, the proper technique to advance the king, the rook makes a passive move. We place in this position. So notice that we are prepared to force. The rook makes it a bit hard. The king makes it a bit harder. So we go to the other side. Now we are threatening to go h8, so forcing the king on this maneuver, and then, well, I think you got it. Let's see now, for example, what happens if the position is with a knight pawn or a rook pawn. We can't win from here. Why? Because, okay, it's white to move, but how can we go to the other side? So as you can see, the rook is limited to the h file, so black just needs to juggle around its own rook on the 8th rank, and there's no way we can force. How can we force it from here? There's no way. So this is a draw. Remember, knight and pawn can't win on this kind of situation. Okay, this was a draw, but now let's see with another pawn. Let's see with a pawn in g4. Now, white is winning again. How to do it? Well, simply we need to think first what is the right position. And the idea is to move this pawn to g7, this one to g5, have the rook over here, then use the rook to come this way, checking the king, forcing the rook to take, the pawn takes back, the king takes back, our king advance, and then the pawn promotion is guaranteed. Let's see this in action. So we first need to make a move, g5 or rook a6. then it's black to play. Of course, black can't leave the last row, otherwise it's going to be checkmate. Okay, so needs to keep the passive defense. Now we play rook a6. The move order here is important. We want to protect our king from the side check, of course. The rook is forced again to a passive move. Now we get these starting positions of the pawn. The rook moves again, and now we go to f file, and then we are just giving a check. The rook is forced to take. We promote to queen, and the king is forced to take back, and now we can simply guarantee the promotion. So now the advancing of the pawn is going to be a win. So this is if we add another pawn to this previous drawing position. And finally, let's look again at the starting position, the Philidor position, but now with black to play. And here you remember that we want to break the shield from the king. And the first move that we got then when we hear white to play was king g6. So I advise always to go search this kind of move. So blocking the king, of course, there are other possibilities. I can go here, for example, behind directly to b1, also works for a draw. But for our purpose, I want you to remember rook b6. So it cuts the king, and so the king isn't possible to advance. And now, if the pawn advances, well, we simply start checking from the side, like for example over here. Okay, so we keep giving side checks. Now it needs to protect the pawn, so needs to come back. And again, is the same situation here. We can simply go behind the pawn, forcing the rook to come to protect, and so on. And so, as you can see, it's impossible for white to force more from here. And I think you also should know that this is the most efficient. There are others, but if you remember that if you cut the king from advancing, forcing the pawn to lose the shielding ability, you are going to be able to draw. And this is all for this lesson. I hope you have enjoyed, and see you in future lessons. Bye bye.